Good afternoon, everyone. Actually, it's a little bit weird for me to present here today because I'm an economist. So a lot of people find my presence is a little bit exotic in these kind of occasions. But the story actually starts with a paper I got published 2 years ago in University of Cambridge, discussing about the economic analysis of the cultural heritage. And that's how GHF actually found me and invited me to join the team to work on this new report of cultural heritage and economic development. So today I'm going to discuss something about cultural heritage and economic development. First of all, I think cultural heritage is commons, and it suffers tragically from the tragedy of the commons. And the tragedy of the commons actually means the commonly shared resources that really receiving sufficient attention for conservation, because who gains from the commons only bears partial or much less than the full cost to the benefits that they receive. So for that very reason, the rational choice is actually to maximize individual appropriations, but minimizing individual cost for the resource maintenance. So actually, which means freedom in the commons brings room to all. And another problem is the free riding on the heritage that brought quite a lot of problems. And a free rider is someone that consumes the resource without paying for it or pay less than the full cost. So it is an economic problem because it leads to a problem of inefficiency, the underproduction, and under-regeneration of that particular resource. And cultural heritage falls into that category as well, because the cultural heritage is composed with both tangible carriers and intangible cultures. So in a sense, it's very difficult to exclude potential users from benefiting those cultural resources. And it faces two general problems. One is the overuse and the other is underuse. And they are in the two extreme ends. As you can see from those pictures, those are actually the case studies I heard during the previous days. Both cases are from Cambodia, and one case is Angkor, and it can be so popular and overcrowded by the tourists. But then the other received quite less attention and left in relic. So the conservation is really a very important problem for that. So why the things are particularly worse in the developing countries? There are several reasons for that. One is the poor governance mechanism. Usually, cultural heritage protection involves multi-level governments, national government, regional government, and local government. And in most developing countries, the states are usually the owner of the heritage sites, or at least they are the authorized custodian of the property. So, which means the role of the state is very important, and the government regulation is a dominant strategy. But then the poor governance in those countries, which usually related to low efficiency management, corruption, and other issues, can generate a lot of problems for heritage management. Not to mention some countries are either under warfare or still haven't got the independent sovereignty. So the second problem is the corruption and rent seeking, and that is a very general problem in developing countries because usually, the public property problem is the risk of producing the government by men but not by laws. So it's very difficult to control that because once the government hold the power to monopolistically control the heritage, there is a breeding bed for corruption and rent seeking. They can either by regulating private investment, offering licensing of the business operation or information control. And by doing that, they can seek some rents from that. So, and in the worst condition, there can be some special interest group organized, composed by the public agencies and private investors. And the third problem is a funding shortage. This is very common in poor countries. And it's not just for poor national governments, but also for the burdens which are largely imposed to the local governments in the least developed areas, and they can't afford it financially, and their physical condition can get deteriorated. And the last problem is the lack of the legal protection, which has been mentioned before. The one particular part I want to mention in this problem is the lack of private property protection, including intellectual private property rights. And in those countries, those legislations are either missing, incomplete, or beautifully combined but very poorly implemented. So that creates a lot of problems in developing countries for heritage management. So I would argue heritage is a capital because they are, as buildings and monuments and other things, they are assets, both in tangible and intangible forms. But as a capital, it requires different inputs, raw materials, human labor, and creativity. And in the most cases, creativity got left out. And then because it's a capital, it will depreciate unless it's well maintained. That means also it's a cost to maintain a capital. And then as a cultural capital, it can also generate values and service continuously, and those are benefits for stakeholders. And this draft has been shown by Jeff a little bit earlier, and that was the value system that I proposed in my published paper. It's a little bit confusing for people to see so many different kind of values. Particularly, most researchers so far are only focusing on the part of the economic values on this side. And the color is not so identical, but if you can see, there's two particular kinds, scientific value and actual value. Those are use value, which means they can be directly reflected in the market. And those up here, those are non-use value, which means usually they are not represented as a price or in the monetary form in the market, but rather you can use certain techniques in economics to capture people's willingness to pay to present their certain consumer preference. And I would say that a large part of those cultural values of heritage have been left out. And the very reason for that is it's very difficult to quantify all those values. And I don't think we should do that either. But the problem of doing a lot of evaluation studies on cultural heritage is people trying to use cultural values as determinants of the economic values. So by doing that, it's very easily to value the particular property much less than it should be. But there's one more point I want to highlight, which is the economic value on this side is not the whole package of the values of the particular heritage sites, but rather it's a marginal value. Because given the fact of the historical building, that building should already have some rental values on the market itself without any heritage qualities. But then those economic values I was trying to demonstrate here is the added value with the heritage characteristics, and probably it can increase or maybe decrease the price of that particular building in the real estate market. So I would propose the combination of two general methodologies to value cultural heritage. One side is quantitative for economic values, which has been practiced for a long time, and those are usually borrowed from environmental economics. So basically, the state preference evaluation methodology is you can capture people's paid price in the market to determine, for instance, how much people would like to pay for a certain historical site, and the admission tickets price, the property price in the real estate market. Those are stated preference. And reviewed preference are people's willingness to pay or to accept for certain values. For instance, option values. Option values here. Some people will just keep the option of the heritage open for their future visit, even they still haven't visited in person, and they were just willing to pay to keep that option open. This is just an example. And the qualitative evaluation methodology is very difficult because all those values, if you can see from here, historical values, symbolic values, authenticity, social values, spiritual value, aesthetic values can be very subjective, and it's very difficult to combine everything into one package. And without doing that, it's very difficult to compare two different heritage sites which are quite similar, and you can't really understand which one is more attractive to public funding and private funding. So what I would propose is to combine both criteria which has been adopted by UNESCO and convert those criteria into a composite index. And by doing that, actually UNDP has already set a very good example of the Human Development Index, because they are just trying to integrated a lot of immeasurable variables into a composite index for public policy reference. So again, I have to emphasize here, I'm not saying that by showing people a number in US dollar units or giving people a number of index can solve all the heritage problem, but it actually can help people to get more reference information at this stage. And current governing approaches for the heritage are mainly two. One is private ownership, and the other is state intervention. And in the developing countries, state intervention is usually the case. And why I put international organization here is because, in my mind, they are not directly governing the heritage site, but they are actually overarching and building up the framework for certain rules and conventions. So the state parties can follow to those rules. And what I would propose is a possibility of institutional approach of self-governing. By doing that, I want to put the local community into the center of the heritage protection and to really think about the community development. And usually, the very dilemma in economics for people's collective action to overcome tragedy of the commons is people cannot cooperate. Because people are rational, so they choose to cheat, they choose various kind of strategic behaviors to avoid the cost and trying to maximize their own gains. So after a lot of studies, there's a lot of studies in economics. I'm not going into the details, but there are three main challenges block people's way for collective action, which is institutions, which means setting up a new set of institutions, and the problem of credit commitment, as well as mutual understanding. And once we can overcome those difficulties, people actually can cooperate. And those has been found in many developing countries, small-scale cases, not necessarily in heritage, but in, for instance, irrigation systems, people just build up their own self-governing mechanism to organize the use and the different time of use and amount of use voluntarily. So it actually can be solved, the problem of the tragedy of commons. And something people usually forgot from heritage protection is poverty. Poverty alleviation is very important for me because by the end of the day, it's really about the common interest of the people who is living around and in the heritage site. So I would say there are a couple of benefits for local poors once the heritage got preserved. The biggest drive would be tourism and related real estate, but those both has to be very carefully and well designed and planned beforehand. Because we see millions of cases in China that once the tourism process just started, it's just impossible to stop, and it will ruin the place in the case of overuse. And again, there's a lot of economic benefits. For instance, it gives local people more economic security. It gives people more diversification of income, and also they can generate local taxation and also help local government to build up more social welfare system. And that leads to the next benefit, which is social engagement and employment. And that is quite obvious. And then heritage preservation can actually contribute to sustainable community, and sustainable community is in the sense of economically sustainable, culturally sustainable, socially sustainable, and naturally sustainable. So this is very important because the local community needs to survive by them own after professional support. Because we have a saying like, if you give people a fish, you can feed him for one day. But if you teach the people to fish, you can actually feed him for a lifetime. So this is what we are going to do. So that leads to other points leading here. One is new stimulus can be generated besides of the tourism development, which is, for instance, eco-agriculture is a very good example, and cultural industry, handicrafts industry from local community. They can register a collective trademark or something like in Italy, they registered Mildura glass manufacturer collective trademark, and currently the local community can benefit from those trademarks. But again, I'm not saying like once you preserve the heritage, you can solve every problem in the world. It's just a start, and there are some possibilities for future. And the final point is the sustainability at two levels. One is a site-specific level, which means heritage preservation needs to make the property in a stable condition. So which means you have to invest in human resource, intelligence, some modern creativity, technology, and money. And sustainable in another sense is the maintenance and daily operation cost. And then is the future investment and the cost benefits and balance, which will have to include the cultural values that I discussed before. And there's a much larger sustainability at a community level as well. For instance, the equity between different generations, because heritage is a bloodline for people connecting to their ancestor and future generation. I'm not going to the details, but I just want to mention one thing. The material and non-material well-being is very important. By feeding up a local community is a good thing, but at the same time, you have to maintain the cultural system as well. Otherwise, people will lose the cultural belonging and sense of cultural identity, and this can be very risky as well. And thank you.
Thank you.